There are elements in the drawing which describe, in a broad sense, the idea of a theatre. On the right-hand side, you'll see the appearance of a curtain. What's being enacted in the drawing is taking place on a stage. So we have Picasso as the set painter. We have the indication of a stage light, a curtain, the stage itself, and the actors. So we have the bull and the bullfighter joining forces in what appears to be an attack on Marie-Thérèse. If you look closely, there are these U-shaped darts here and suggested here and here, and there are similar U-shaped darts behind Olga. And in Picasso's poetry, Marie-Thérèse becomes the personified wounded horse in the bullfight, and this is what we see in the drawing. Picasso's wife and the bull have joined forces in an attack on Marie-Thérèse. And so we see these darts which are symbolic of bull's horns. She's being gored by the bull symbolically. In Picasso's poetry, Marie-Thérèse becomes the target of obscene insults and injury. So the general situation is that Picasso's crucified between his wife and his mistress appears to have become pregnant. This is how the biographical background links in with the drawing. So it's presented to us in terms of a bullfight and a crucifixion. There was a certain amount of aggression coming from his wife's side of the relationship. She had threatened divorce, and she was behaving in an irrational, aggrieved way. This is reported in the biographies. Picasso went on the defensive. He went off into seclusion. There's a number of drawings where Olga's depicted as a monster with a sharp implement, a knife, and she's rushing in to attack Marie-Thérèse. Here we see more or less the same thing, but it's done in the context of a bullfight. So Marie-Thérèse is the personification of the wounded horse. She's in a state of demise and shame, and this is all reflected in Picasso's writings of the period and in his drawings. He was viewing this in the context of theatrical production. And we have suggestions of puppetry. Picasso had been involved around the turn of the century in Barcelona with the production of puppet shows and so on. It starts to come out in the iconography of the drawing, and what we see are the suggestions of the two women, the two thieves at Picasso's crucifixion, depicted as puppets. Marie-Thérèse becomes a marionette from Picasso's extended hand. He seems to be making contact with these vertical lines as if she were a marionette. And then on the other side of the drawing, we have the suggestion that Olga is also a puppet. She has Picasso's outstretched arm inside her head, as if she were a glove puppet. So there's this aspect of Picasso, the puppet master, the creator of the situation, being presented to us. So we have this idea of a pantomime horse and this impression of him riding that pantomime horse at the moment of death in this crucifixion. On the theatre curtain, we have the suggestion of a fringe along the bottom in the area of Olga's legs, but just behind her thighs here, there is a design on the curtain. It looks like an Art Deco motif. What we're looking at is a rearrangement of a version of Picasso's name. We've got all the letters suggesting the name that Picasso first used at his exhibition at El Cattegat in 1900. He used the name Picazzo. We get this name Picazzo. He's put a cryptic autograph on this curtain. Picasso liked to incorporate elements of signatures and cryptic signatures. We see it in the three dancers, in the legs of the central character, and here we see the letter P. We can see two more elements of this hidden signature in the faces of the two women. If you look at Marie-Thérèse's eyes and the dark line following down the cheek and going down the side of her neck, this is a letter Z, and we have the same under Olga's chin. Her neckline and the part of her dress that cuts into her neckline and the line under her chin also form a Z. So we have these two Zs or Zs, part of this hidden Picazzo signature. So the two women incorporate his signature. We have more writing on Olga's sleeve. The upper part of her sleeve seems to contain some kind of script, which I think Alfred Barr Jr. discussed in his book Picasso 50 Years of His Art. He talks about it as Kufic script. He'd identified it in one of Picasso's prints. To the right of this concealed arm in Olga's face, there is a devil hidden in the shadows. So you'll see the nose coming down here. You can see the eye, the large upper lip, and the suggestion of a black tongue sticking out, and also a trident suggestion behind it. So there is this idea that Picasso is blocking the devil's advance with this arm of light. There's another impression of a devil. One can see two horns suggested in the white areas of the women's clothing. And in relation to this, there's an eye symbolized in front of Olga. And this has strong associations with a couple of crucifixion drawings from around the same period. And we see this pointed cat-like eye appear in these other crucifixion drawings. You can see the close association. There's even a suggestion of a second eye pupil that one can see, a pointed indication of a symmetrical pupil, which has sort of dissolved back into the shadowy impressions of the drawing. Because of its symmetrical appearance, it does seem to be intentional. Interestingly, we get descriptions of Olga behaving more or less as a woman possessed. This is strongly remarked on by some of the biographers. If you look closely at this hidden face, you'll notice that its nose is one half of the head of a phallus. There's a phallic element, a mushroom-headed tip of a phallic suggestion there. Now, Picasso was well known for incorporating these phallic elements in the faces of some of his models. So here we see another hidden erotic element in the drawing, the appearance of an enormous phallic shape coming up from the base of the drawing, hidden in the structure of the ladder and the paint bucket above it. Interestingly, this corresponds almost identically with a much earlier picture from around 1903. The glands can be seen in the white area around the paint bucket. The space between the paint bucket and the handle takes on the form of the eye of the phallus. We have the symbolic idea presented to us that Picasso is suffering from sexual desire. This is his wound in his crucifixion, this massive flow of blood coming from the wound. There's some suggestion of a flame-like element here, very elaborate with this round thing on the top. It's almost as if Olga is bringing it in her hands. It's not made clear, but this has a direct relationship to the light bringer in Guernica, the light bringer being, of course, Lucifer. We've got this same kind of relationship going on with the lady with the lamp, the woman in Guernica, and this flame-like object in front of Olga, which is actually, on one level, a vaginal opening. So we have the anus and the vagina. So we've got these typical Picasso orientations of the genitalia. He would often incorporate these very explicit elements. We get this suggestion of an embracing couple and their child within this vaginal opening. And in relation to this, we can see that Picasso had experimented with the idea of putting figures in vaginal openings. We see it here. What's interesting about this is in regard to Picasso's fascinations with lettering and the incorporations of signatures and so on, he was also very interested in numbers. And this has relationships with the tarot. André Derain and Max Jacob taught Picasso how to read the tarot and use the tarot. When you rotate this image, the embracing couple suddenly becomes a number 13, which is the number of the death card in the tarot. So this idea of the embracing couple transforms. This is very typical of Picasso's use of doubled and tripled symbolism. Now, it would seem to be a snarling mouth in the head of the bull. The type of mouth one might relate to an angry dog or a wolf. This would then fall in line with the bull and the bullfighter's attack on Marie-Thérèse. Interestingly, while we're talking about doubled and tripled imagery, we get the idea of this arm puncturing or passing through the eye of the bull, becoming severed, and at the same time representing the anal orifice of this configuration. So you can see how the imagery is doubled and tripled and has significance, not just on the one level. Olga is somehow involved with this idea, these lovers and this incorporation into some sort of dark lamp. We've got a suggestion of the embracing couple. This, of course, would refer to Picasso and his lover, and the idea of a pregnancy. There's this smaller suggestion of what might be a baby or something here. And in relation to this, we have the pregnancy theme reinforced because in the shaded wash and this black suggestion of hair behind Picasso's head, we have the form of a baby's feeding bottle. So this baby's feeding bottle would seem to relate to the idea of a pregnancy, or possibly a termination of a pregnancy that Picasso is going back to. Interestingly, we see the crossover in the three dancers. Here we see a wine bottle in more or less the same location as the feeding bottle in the 1934 drawing. We can see the relationship between the two. If you look at this drawing of a circus acrobat, we get the idea of this crossover between wine and a baby's feeding bottle. So this strong association between the three dancers in the 1934 drawing within this autobiographical context that covers a crucifixion, a bullfight, and the theatre. It's very much like some kind of deep psychological piece of shadow theatre.